Namaste. Thank you for joining us. So I had a request to talk about, to give an overview of a heart sourcing. And it really starts with the prime question. The prime question that we have to ask ourselves, and that is, what am I? That starts in a very simple way. I'm reminded of the famous quote by Henry Ford, who says, the people who think they can and the people who think they cannot are both right.
Can you turn your device around?
Yeah, it's on.
It's on?
Mm-hmm. Where you don't have sound?
No.
Excuse us. Testing? Okay, that helps. Okay. So the question is what we are, because when we don't know what we are, we're like blind people, not knowing how to get around in this world in a way that is really appropriate for us. So when you ask somebody, what are you? They're going to instinctively first connect that question with their body, their appearance, then perhaps the history, their learning, their relationships, their primary ideas. There is an emotional tone of how we think about who we are. Right? The way that you're used to experiencing you, which has different layers to it. So let's have a look at those layers, right? So on the most outward level, there are your relationships and the world as you know it. And of course, everyone lives in a different world. We have enough overlap in our different worlds that we can get along, hopefully, with each other. But we sort of relate to the same world. But everyone has completely their own experience of the external world. Then the next layer is your body. So that's what we usually identify with as I, in the most tangible sense. Then we notice that in that body, we experience energy, and the energy is expressed in the way we behave, what we do. So there's a level of the outer world, there's a level of the body, and then there's an energetic or behavioral level. Going further in, matter of speaking, we have a layer of emotions. We all have feelings. Going further in, we have thoughts, specific thoughts. And then there's one more layer, which is a layer where we feel our sense of identity is separate from other people's identity, this sense of separation. And with that comes a certain distractedness. There's a certain sense of a subtle anxiety, because when we're separate, then we're not connected. And somewhere, whenever we can connect, that makes us feel very safe and secure and hopefully loved and alive. So you see there's many layers to this. It's kind of like an onion with many layers. And this is what we usually call I. And we have a drawing of that. It looks like that. These are just some of the layers, and you can, paint more layers if you like, of what we call the person. Now, when you think about it, the person comes and goes. It's born at one point it dies, and it carries you through this life, and it's very good to take care of it. But if something comes and goes, if something is so unstable, can it really be you? So we need to ask that question a little bit further. In addition, this looks like a donut, doesn't it? We call that the donut, right? Now, psychology is all about that, because here is the area where we have personal problems, where we have our neuroses and our difficulties, and psychology is all about fixing that and making us more comfortable in the way we live in this world, right? So psychology, which informs us to a great extent in our culture as to who we are, is concerned with the vehicle. This is the vehicle we live in for a lifetime. And of course, the vehicle needs to be taken care of. Now, when we look at the vehicle, we can see that there's a sequence of events in our lives that happen from the subtle to the gross. For instance, you have a stressful thought, and you don't know how to clear the mind of that stressful thought. Then what happens next? It becomes an emotion. You feel it. You have the thought, he cheated me. Then it becomes an emotion. You may get angry, you may get hurt. Other thoughts may come in, so there's a feedback loop immediately. You may say, oh, this world just is an unfriendly world. People cheat people here. It's just terrible, right? So then there's an additional thought, and that in turn creates more negative emotions, right? When you don't know how to get out of that cycle, then behavior comes into that, right? It becomes more manifest. Now you behave in, say, a defensive or hostile manner toward this person or maybe other people. And when you keep doing that, it eventually becomes physically manifest. You may lose that relationship. Other physical manifestations include any kind of body symptoms, illness, etc. So there's these negative feedback loops within that sequence of how things happen, from mind to emotions to behavior to physical manifestation. And they reinforce themselves each time. Right? So let's go back to our fundamental question. Who am I? You all already have a sense that you're not just this physical body entity. And what we are is veiled from us by what we call the impurities of the mind. The different ways that the mind keeps going back to its old patterns, reinforced by emotions, and then really brought down home by our behavior. So we live in this same circumstance that we've been conditioned to experience, internally and externally. So when we work with the mind, and the mind becomes clear, increasingly clear, we may have flashes of insight that do not come from linear thinking. Like if you try to figure something out, A plus B equals C, you know. No, you may just have a flash and realize what D is all about without thinking about it, without even trying. A sudden insight. This is a quality of the mind which we call intuition. So this is the higher mind. There's a lower mind which has these three layers that we just spoke about. And then there's a higher mind which is free, which does not have to rely on thinking. It just intuitively knows. It has the direct capacity to perceive truth. This higher mind is a direct outflow of the very core of who we are. So it shows us already something different here that's not really part of the narrative of our culture very much. I mean, we know about intuition here and there, but that there is a mind that can know like that And that we have the capacity to rely on that mind increasingly until that really runs our lives. That's really something new in our culture. But we can go further than that. So if we go another layer inward in our being, we find the presence of pure unconditional love. It's funny, this thing about love in our culture, because we don't really have a sense of the origin of that love. We just know that love can happen to us and it's powerful. And almost always it immediately becomes connected with or adulterated by attachment. That's not always the case. When you see a sunset and you just are stunned by the beauty of it, you can love it and you know there's nothing to attach to because it comes and goes. In 5 minutes, this is going to be over. So there we know not to attach ourselves, but watch out when it's a human being. And immediately we want to have them in the way we want to have them. And that is like a poison that is entered into, that's mixed with the nectar of that love. And so in our culture, love has a bad name. Love is even subconsciously connected to the idea that it can be taken away from us, that there is suffering involved, that, you know, if you love today, you're going to really hurt tomorrow. And so we're afraid to love. We have great armoring around our hearts. There's both the obstructions that are created by negative emotions, stressful thinking, etc. But there's also this refusal to love out of fear of being hurt. So now when we understand that the source of love is internal, we can begin to change this scenario of fear, this hesitation to love. Now that also takes some explanation. When you fell in love, when you loved anything or anyone in the past, where did this love come from? We have this sense that somehow it must come from that person or object or situation that we love into us. And that stems from childhood, because when we were children and mommy came and took care of us, then it really was like that. It was like, oh, because she was there, we could relax, everything we knew was taken care of. And so we have a very deep conditioning to rely on external sources for that love, and to then going further, rely on or believe that it has to be the outer object that creates that love somehow. But when you really look, you see that all the love that you ever have experienced and will experience takes place inside of you. And what heart sourcing can do for you is to give you the key to that internal source. It's even like that with the love we can have for God. As long as we have the concept that God is something external, and that's fine to have, because God certainly is external as well as internal. So when we have that sense that God is external, then we live in a world where we can be in touch with God, where God can be there. We feel this living presence, and then sometimes we don't. And the most famous stories of that are the stories of Krishna. Where Krishna is the divine lover, and he comes to each soul symbolically told about as the gopis, these friends of Krishna. We're all these friends of Krishna. And Krishna is this sense of profound openness, profound love. And he comes and we're in ecstasy, we play with him, and he plays his flute and we can't think of anything else. It's this trance-inducing. And we run toward the sound of the flute, and then it stops and he's gone. And we're again, oh, where's Krishna, where's Krishna? And we feel that pain of separation. And we go between the pain of separation and the bliss of union, back and forth, until we figure out something. And what we need to figure out is that the source is inside of us. That the source is timeless and absolute, that we have in us the capacity, the living reality of all the love that is possible, period. That there was never a saint or a god who had more capacity for love than us. They've just used it a little bit more. They're more used to it. And so we can remove the obstructions and the fear and begin to enrich ourselves and nurture ourselves and heal ourselves and transform ourselves and ultimately allow ourselves to be awakened and enlightened by that internal love. So when we look at our diagram again, this is the complete one. We see that we have the layers of the person. And from the person we go, there's more layers here, the outer world. Your friends, the millions of people you feel neutral about, your enemies. All of those can be included in your world. But then when we go inside, we see that we're not a donut. That there are these two layers of the intuitive mind, intuitive intelligence, or the wisdom mind, and the layer of bliss, of unconditional, complete love. These are the layers of what we call the soul. This is the direct experience of the soul. And the soul, our identity that remains from life to life, can identify in two ways. It can identify with the person, with the momentary vehicle that we inhabit. And then, of course, there will be the fear of death, the greatest fear that the ego has of annihilation, because the ego will be annihilated. But the soul also can, instead of, or increasingly in addition to identifying with the vehicle, identify itself with the very divine self that we are. So when it does that, when it identifies with the divine self, with the presence of God in you, then there is no fear of death, because that doesn't change. When the body drops off, there's no change. So here's one clue, that this identification with our true being, our true identity, we can lose fear. And it doesn't go instantly, it goes step by step. As we more and more identify with that inner essence that we can point to, but cannot really describe, because you can only describe things. You cannot describe the source of all things. But we are aware of our capacity for love and our capacity for intuitive insight. Now, the soul is not a thing. It's a habit. It's a bundle of what we have used what we've been used to think of ourselves as from lifetime to lifetime. It can be dressed in an astral body that's still pretty much like this body. And in the astral body, the spiritual movement is one of ascendance. It goes from the first chakra, which is connection to the physical universe, through the 7 different layers, 7 primary layers, all the way to the top of the head, to that place of oneness with God. In a more subtle way, when we go really another octave higher in the way we experience ourselves to be, we go beyond the astral body into the causal body. The causal body doesn't look like a physical body any longer. And here, that oneness experience that we have in the ultimate experience of our subtle body or astral body is found in the very core of our being. So in HeartSourcing Yoga, we begin with that level. We begin with the core of our being, which is experienced as the deepest center of the heart. The word in Sanskrit for that is Hridayam. In the East, people have explored these inner realities for thousands of years and have created words that describe these subtle realities very precisely. We have to struggle for these words because we don't have them in our languages, the Western languages. So the Hridayam, which we translate with heart, which means, the word heart means several other things also, right? But the Hridayam is very interesting. That innermost core, Hridayam, it means you are that. So here already it points to that innermost core being our core identity. Now, that core expresses itself in the presence of love in us. A love that cannot be injured, where you cannot be hurt. Because there's no one else that can take it away. And when you fill yourself with this internal love from that source that never runs dry, you will have plenty to share. You won't be able to wait until you have the grace to be with someone who is willing to receive that love, and you don't have to ask for anything back. It's not a needy love, which is not love at all. It's not a conditioned love, which also is not love. It's a horse trade that says, I'll give you attention if you give me this. Whatever it is that you want. Yeah, I want security, I want your presence, I want you to look pretty, whatever it is, depending on, person to person. There you're just in the very bullseye when we're looking at this image of the target, the very core and center of being. And from there, you enrich yourself with this stream of love, this liquid essence of your true being. Now, the secret to this is that this love, this essence is in us all the time. So why don't we feel it all the time? Well, we've been very distracted. We've been distracted by thinking that we're the vehicle that we're riding in. It's like, I'm my Toyota. That sounds crazy, but we identify with the person all the time. And it still sounds strange to us when I talk about the person in this way, like in this objective way, because we always identify with the person, right? But the person that's sitting here, that you usually think you are, is what you're inhabiting. So you are this consciousness and this profound love inside of that person. And many of you have heard me say this before, and it's okay to hear it again. Because in all the spiritual traditions, there's a principle. And the principle is that of hammering in. We have to hear these things over and over again. And why? Because we have lived such a long time, so many lifetimes, identifying always with the vehicle, with the person. So we need to hear these words that I'm saying in so many different ways. And then we get to dwell on them, we get to ponder them. Some people hearing such words, this may be the very first time they ever hear it. It may sound very strange. But then you sit with that, you take it in, you contemplate it, you meditate on it. And you may find it to be true. And that's really all that counts. That it becomes your experience. So what any teacher can do, it only is to point towards something. And then you need to find if it's true for you or how it's true for you. Now the beautiful thing about heart sourcing is that we have this capacity to directly tune into the love in us, that infinite source in us. We can do it in small ways or big ways. And then the secret comes that we don't really usually do it because the mind is distracted. We're busy. You know, we have work to do. We have dishes to wash. We have children to raise. So we generally wait until something hurts. We don't have to, but it's human nature. So when we feel something that hurts, whether it's a physical thing or an emotional thing, we can become aware where that hurt is in the body, where we feel it, where the discomfort is. So let's say the discomfort is right here in the gut. This churning, this sense of anxiety or anger, or maybe some old heavy grief, or a sense of just feeling empty and not connected. Can be all kinds of different things. And it could be anywhere in the body. We identify that. And then, simply because someone once told you, you can remember that in the very core of your being, you have the perfect antidote for that suffering. And you can then mentally connect the place of pain, the place of discomfort or stress, with that infinite source. And of course, the stress can be in the chest as well. And then we have great language like, my heart is broken, my heart is heavy, and so on. Well, it never breaks. That heart, your emotions may break, but that heart that I'm speaking of, that core of your being, cannot break. You couldn't exist without it, and it is always whole and complete. Always. This is the presence of God in you. How can there be a problem there? But we, like I said, we're too busy, we're distracted. So pain reminds us, and after we do it with pain, we can just do it without the pain. Definitely recommend it. So we connect that inner source that is internal to any pain that may be here, and that place of the pain. And we imagine that that inner source becomes like a sun. It radiates because that is its nature. And it irradiates its warmth and its healing power in all directions, and it's especially then received in the place of the pain. And so now this inner sun, this inner source, has a place in which it is received. And this is difficult for some of us, to actually receive this inner love, this inner essence, this healing. So when there's any thoughts, when you can identify any thoughts of the nature of you don't deserve it, or too good to be true, or whatever it may be, question them. And allow yourself to fill yourself with this richness that is yours, that is the essence of who you are. Allow it to soak into every cell of your body, every part of your emotional being, your mind. Allow it to become all as brilliant as the sun. And there's 3 stages in that process. And they're symbolized by 3 types of light. And they're also one of the meanings of the great mantra Ram, R-A-M. The R stands for the light of fire. So at first we go through our lives and we enter this spiritual path, this spiritual discipline, with the desire to change ourselves for the better. And that changing takes fire. It takes the fire of purification, the fire of Kundalini that burns away everything that is an obstruction. So we begin there. And to have a regular discipline is extremely helpful for that. But soon enough, and especially with heart sourcing, immediately, you come across a different kind of light, the light of the sun. That is the light of inner knowledge. And it shines in you. And with heart sourcing, you can immediately have that. And if it's just with an imagination, that's perfectly fine. But do not imagine that this is imaginary. You're just imagining something that you will then, because you're training your mind in this way, experience as absolutely real. That there's a force in you that is sun-like in nature. And as this inner healing and transformation progresses, the light changes one more time. And it becomes like the soothing light of the moon. And this is when your heart becomes mature, when your loving nature finds its stride, and you are able to love easily. You become that soothing presence because you are at peace and in love in yourself. This is very different from, again, we have messages in our culture that it's not okay to love yourself because it's some kind of ego trip or some kind of narcissistic disturbance. Nothing could be further from the truth. The problem why human life is so difficult on this planet is because we don't know this inner source enough. There's so many people now becoming aware of the problems with the environment. And that is excellent. It's certainly a very profoundly important step outside of the little box of our ego concerns. If we ruin the environment that gives us life, that sustains us, we endanger ourselves and everyone else. But the most important thing here is the most important environment to consider is, first of all, the environment that we live in, which is our internal environment. Is that clear and pure? Is that being maintained in the right way? Or is it polluted by anger or shame or hurt? Is it even polluted by the grief about the destruction of nature that we can see around us? Because even that grief is something that weighs you down, that burdens you. And you contribute to the outer environment exactly the quality of your inner environment. So do what you do in the world, but free yourself in the process. Know that that is the most important way you can contribute to others and to the world at large. So let's spend a little time actually making this practical, making it into an experience. And let's find something simply because it helps the mind. We don't need to have any suffering to feel the heart. As a matter of fact, increasingly there will be times where you just love, where you're just in love. And if you're in a space like that right now, by all means ignore what I'm saying about looking for some stressor. We need to, in order to find that inner presence of love, which is two things. It is extremely subtle and at the same time absolutely powerful. So in order to hone our awareness, to become aware of this presence, to be able to feel it, to be able to actually experience it, we need to kind of prime the pump. And we can do this in two ways. You can think of an experience that you've had in the past, of your heart being wide open. And think of it concretely. You were with this person or in this situation. Call up the memory and then step into the memory. And taste again this wide open heart. Or you can take something that bothers you. So let's go with that now. So allow a memory to come up of something or someone whom you have not yet forgiven 100%. Maybe a situation that was difficult, heavy, caused you to feel anger or pain or fear. And then step into that so it becomes real for you right now, and you can free that part of you a little bit more. So identify where in your being you experience that sense of disturbance, that stress, that tension, that emptiness. Identify its location in the body. And yes, you can use in physical pain as well. And know this discomfort to be not a problem, not a threat or an enemy, but simply a part of you that needs help. And you are the one who can bring it that help. You have the most profound medicine in you. So identify precisely where you feel that disturbance, that discomfort in your body. And simply be present with it. And then leave it there and come to the very core of your being. Imagining there the presence of a brilliant sun. A sun that effortlessly radiates its warmth and its light into all directions. And then receive the warmth and the light of that inner effulgence in that place of the pain. Absorb that warmth. Surrender to it. Absorb it more and more deeply into that place of discomfort and into your entire being. And notice how opening to this heart essence, this great love in you, is absolutely safe. You are the source of love. And it is more profound than you can possibly imagine. It cannot be imagined, but it can be experienced. And here is the answer to the question, what are you? You are this love. You are this vast, loving awareness. You have always been this vast and loving awareness, but you've been distracted. And now you remember. You remember not in the mind. You remember in your whole being. You open up to this love that you are. You drink it like the thirsty person coming out of the desert into the oasis of the heart. You can drink your fill. And never again be separated from this infinite source in you. Because in reality, nothing can ever separate you from it. Nothing can separate you from what you are. And as you let yourself relax into this core of your being, the love fills you. All the obstructions dissolve. All fear dissolves. And you drink more and more deeply from the heart. And then you will notice two things. You are never separated from that internal source of love. And its radiance shines back at you from all things, from all beings. whether you call them friends or neutral or enemy. All beings and all things, all experiences in your world, reflect back that love to you. Whether you label them pleasant or unpleasant, desirable or not. Pleasure or pain. You are that place of love. And anything that occurs in your world has one reason and purpose: to lead you into that heart more deeply. So take a deep breath. Exhale fully. And let's close with our 3 ohms. Take a deep breath in again. And relax. So, any questions, any comments?
You said something about the soul being imagination?
No.
No.
The soul isn't a thing,
Mhm.
right? When we look at the Hinduism and Buddhism, it's like Hinduism was there first, and then a new religion starts forming, and they always have to say, no, we're different from the old one, right? You see that in the Middle East where Christianity arose too, right? We're better, we're different, right? And it seems to be different when you first look at it, and then you look deeper, you see that all talking about the same thing in different ways, right? So in Hinduism, you talk about Atman, right? The soul. This is the Hindu, the Sanskrit term, right? And then Buddhism came about and said, well, the Atman isn't a thing. And so they came up with the term Anatman, which means no soul. It's like there is no soul. Because the Hindu understanding at that time, at least by some people, was degenerated into thinking of the soul as a thing, right? The soul is not a thing. It's like when you think of your being going through lifetime after lifetime, there's an identity, a stream of habits, a certain karmic essence that flows from one life into the next. Like all of us can probably relate to the fact that we came into this world and there were a few issues dished out to us right away, right? Because of our parents or our environment or illnesses or whatever may have occurred, right? So we right away get something to work on. Well, this is something that had to come about because of that stream of memories that you have projected from lifetime to lifetime into one body after another, right? So there's certain learning that needs to happen. So that learning, the insight that comes to us later, first comes as a challenge, a problem, right? So then later it can then become an insight, and we have the opportunity in each life to overcome these issues. And by overcoming these issues, dissolve our attachment to living that out in body after body after body. So then having a body becomes increasingly optional. And then you also see that you have certain gifts. There's certain things that other people struggle for, and may just come pretty natural to you. Or it can happen with relationships. You find somebody who shows up in your life and there's just this connection. This could be positive or negative. Somebody really bothers you a whole lot, right? Shows up in your life to show you a certain place in you that needs attention, a part of you that needs help, right? So this comes out of this stream of memories and habits that we are, that takes body after body after body. But ultimately the soul's identity is the identity of the Supreme, of God. So in other words, the ultimate nirvana is the soul as a separate entity dissolving into that absolute bliss of God, the white light of God. We have only formulas, it cannot be expressed in words. It's just too big for that. Words about things. This is the source of it all. We can only point to the moon, right? So the soul is not a thing, but it is what propels us from body to body. And at one body, and it's like, if you think back, just imagine this time like has no beginning. So from the amoeba that crawled out of the original slime, if we just look at this planet, but there's many other worlds and world systems to pick from or to live in, right? Mm-hmm. But so this stream of evolution is just like incredibly long until you end up in a human body. And then in a human body, evolution also is extremely slow. But there comes a point where the consciousness in you that you are becomes aware of itself. It says, hey, I want to wake up to what I really am. And then you can derive the essence of what you really are, which is that love, directly. It's completely available to us. You can directly tune into it like we just did. And with that, your evolution just takes on, it's like this hockey stick, kind of like in a business chart, right? So your business goes well, and then you go viral, like that. And it's the same thing with your evolution. When you get the wisdom of knowing that you are not this person who you thought you are, so this is the mind awakening. And that's great, but then the heart awakening puts substance to it. Suddenly, now it becomes irresistible because your being wants to have that love. Your being wants to have that love. but you may have obstructions to it, right? That's why we're all not just like wonderfully filled and beaming and completely alive all the time. Right? So when you experience those obstructions, however they come, say, welcome. So glad to meet you. Let me see what I can do for you. And what have you done so far? Beat up on it, run away from it, indulge in it, or complain about it. Right? So, not so helpful. And we experience the soul through that intuitive intelligence, that ability of just immediately being aware of something. And you can have intuitions that are so powerful that the whole world can tell you, no, no, you're wrong. This is not it. You're totally off the wall. Give it up. Forget it. Don't go in this direction. And you go anyway. And sure enough, this will be very good that you do it anyway. In my generations, we had that pleasure when we first left our country and our families and everything we knew, and we went to this crazy place called India. Because some intuition spoke to us, something called us, and we couldn't resist it. But that, yeah, and it's also when you have a taste of what is real for you, and that may come intuitively, and then it's almost like the universe has to object to it in order to test you, to test that your commitment to your spiritual awakening is true. And if you do it anyway, a certain hard-headedness is quite useful. You know, but hard-headedness in regards to your inner, deeper knowing, not to your ego preferences, right? So when that intuition awakens and you're called, don't listen to your grandmother who wants you to be nice and comfortable. Go for it anyway. And realize she just means, you know, has your best in mind. Or your spouse who doesn't want to be pushed out of his comfort zone. When you're called, listen. And that call is actually unmistakable. But we distract ourselves and we don't really want to listen because there may be some discomfort involved. So this is the last time we're going to meet here in Miami in this house, and the last time you're going to meet with us online from here, because the next time we're going to have a satsang like this will be in India, and you'll be wherever you are. And you know, a lot of times, I just want to say this also, a lot of times people have asked me, should I go to India and so on, and my answer is always don't. No, you don't need to go to India. We're going simply because we have a personal invitation by someone that we couldn't resist, couldn't, you know, not go, because it's that type of an invitation. And for us, that is the right way to do it. You know, for you, you know, going to India may be a complete waste of time, or not. Listen to that inner calling. What's important is not to travel externally, but to travel internally into that source. And that is wherever you are. So, who else has a question or something to say? So we stay entertained here.
I would like to ask this, maybe there's no
A little
answer.
louder.
There is maybe no exact answer, but how do you find God?
How do you find God? I just told you.
No, but this,
Yeah.
like,
There's not one answer to that, right?
Yeah.
So how do you find God? Everyone finds God in the way God reveals herself to him. I know it's usually himself, but you know, we have some leeway there. God is neither male nor female. It's just our language that has that mechanism. So God comes to you, and God is already fully in you. But there's a process of that being revealed. And that happens differently with every person. There's certain principles that are true. Like you do really well to develop some stillness. That's usually sort of like your entry ticket. Because when the mind is just running and running and running in its conditioned way, you wake up and one thought follows another until you fall exhausted back into sleep, then there is very little chance of you actually getting to know yourself. It's like you're always busy with something else. And even the thoughts about you is about something else, because it's not the experience of your true essence. It's just the, you know, you're tinkering with your car, with your vehicle, with your person. So stillness is really a good thing. So that's where we start, right? So now we're saying, yeah, what can we do in this to enable this process of God revealing itself to us? So stillness is for the antidote for the distractedness of the subtlest layer of the mind. In other words, we have to work with our person, mind, emotions, behavior, and physical bodies, right? So some stillness. Then we have specific stressful thoughts. Now we're going through those layers again. These layers, really, because it's the vehicle, the person. When our person is beset with problems, then we cannot experience that richness inside of us. We cannot experience the presence of God in us because we're too busy, we're distracted by stuff, right? So we need to make the person transparent to that. That is a funny thing because God's presence is always already fully there. It's just the question, where's our attention, right? So then we can have stressful thoughts. What happens when you have a stressful thought? What happens to your heart? Boom, it shuts down immediately, right? So the antidote to stressful thinking is truth. How do we find truth? Well, the work of Byron Katie is one incredible tool to take a stressful thought and examine it with the power of your own mind. Examine that thought, looking for the truth. What is the truth? I just did something with a young man who is being told by his teachers, his parents, his peers that he's lazy. And we just did this inquiry on this simple statement, I'm lazy, which was like one of the fundamental ways he identified himself, right? And it's not to, we don't do that to help him get out of laziness or to be more productive. These are all side effects that may or may not come. We do it to find out the truth. And he found out an entirely different reality. He found out that he's not lazy at all when he finds something that interests him. But when he is in school and there are certain ways they're trying to teach him that just he doesn't connect with it, right? Because, it's like, imagine this in our school system. I know I'm going a little into detail here, but why not? In our school system, imagine Picasso as a boy in school, right? And he's got this like incredible creativity inside of him. And how does that work? It comes as imagination at first. You see, before you can paint a painting, you have to have the imagination. This is also true for inventions or anything else that's new, right? This creativity. So there's a kid sitting in school and he has this incredible talent of creativity that makes him later into Picasso, right? But what is the teacher going to say? Hello, you lazy kid, pay attention to the math on the board. Stop daydreaming. So that creativity gets beaten out of him, right? And he's then labeled as lazy, etc., etc. And then he thinks badly of himself, and he has this idea that he can't do it, that he's not good enough, that he's just a failure. This is incredibly wasteful. And it happens all the time, and it probably happened to you in some ways. And you can look at these old tapes, these conditioned beliefs, and uninstall them directly. In the old days, we had to do this with something like meditation, and meditation is fantastic for the generation of stillness. I don't find it all that effective in freeing me of specific stressful thoughts. That's why we have this new tool now, the work of Byron Katie, right? So clear the mind of its stressful beliefs. Then the mind does something else. It falls into emotions. Then, there they are. And they're like heavy. You can feel them in your body. And for that, we have this amazing remedy of being present with them, as Eckhart Tolle teaches, or in open attention. We start in the same way, but then we connect that feeling of heaviness, of constriction, of tension, of stress in the body with that essence in the heart. And it's just powerful, fast healing. Then on the layer of behavior, there are many things we need to do. If you have a habit of angry outbursts, it may be a really good idea for you to constrain that. But the most important thing on the level of behavior is to be of service, to serve other beings, to get yourself out of your involvement with your own little drama by being there for someone else. And that in turn purifies the heart, because this is love in action. And on the level of physical manifestation, again, there are many things we need to do. We need to eat right, we need to pay attention to health care, to cleanliness, to shelter, livelihood, all of those things. But the most essential one is to be in satsang, to be with people of like mind that can support and challenge you, but challenge you constructively in your journey toward the revelation of that God in you. And if you have a sense of devotion to God, then it's most likely that you've learned it as seeing God as an external entity, an external presence. And that is true, because there's no place where God is not. So when you have that sense of devotion toward Jesus, or toward Mary, or toward Krishna, or any of these incredible sacred beings, a contemporary teacher or guru, go into that, let it enrich you, let it fill you. And know that ultimately the essence of that being you adore, that God you worship, is right inside of you, and it greets you from inside. It is your essence. These beings are sacred beings because they are no longer themselves. What I mean by that is they're no longer identified with the person. they're identified with the core of their being. And that core of the being is the same in all of us. That is where we are one. Where the same loving awareness that is speaking these words in me and looking at you through these physical eyes looks back at me through your eyes and is active in your being in just the right way, knowing exactly what it is that you need to prepare yourself for the revelation of God in you. And then to open up to it like a flower opens to the sun, naturally. And everything that happens to you, good or bad, we label it good or bad, pleasure or pain, everything serves that process. So when something particularly difficult happens, I invite you to immediately start looking, how is this helpful to me? What is it pointing out? What is it? How am I reacting? And what is this place of reactivity in me? And how can I deal with that? Because ultimately, it's always us who make ourselves unhappy. We make ourselves unhappy about whatever we are unhappy about. But the events and people themselves cannot do that to us. We do that to us. But that's not so easy to see every time. Good question.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have like a concern, and it's based on my recent own experience. By the grace, I have been able to apply these tools in situations that were really challenging, and the outcome have been very positive. But they're still like behind. Like there's a fight because the outcome it doesn't mean that it was apparently positive for me. It was just very peaceful, no drama.
Mm-hmm.
But I still inside me. I'm very, there's a fight going between me because things that I didn't say, things that I didn't do. I just applied everything for everything to be smooth in a way that I was not entangled with the situation as a person. Just trying to just allow things to.
So what is the primary problem that is bugging you?
That I'm not at peace, there's like an inner fight, even though there's peace because there was not.
Yeah, but what is not at peace? Is it that you feel you should have said or done something else? Is that a pattern?
Yes, had more, even though it makes like doesn't make sense because everything came good, but I just kind of content that personality in such a way that I really didn't say many things that I wanted it to say or do many things that I wanted it to do. So,
yeah, and yet you did and said exactly what was able to be said and done. The rest you add with your mind. It's like you have this idea that you should have said something, you should have done something, there should have been a different outcome. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that way of thinking, when you really look at that, what are you really thinking here? You're thinking that the past should have been different.
Yeah, I think now it's coming. What it was kind of asleep there, which is not controlling, not doing. Now it's coming like to the surface and say, like you should have like.
Right, I'm
very surprised.
Yeah.
It's like the old patterns trying to say like, why didn't you were you?
Okay. So slow down. You were what you were at that time, right? And you did what that being did at that time. We're not static. We're not one way or another. We change all the time. We're like a river that flows. It completely changes. The essence remains the same, but it changes all the time. One time it tumbles over rocks, and one time it's flowing peacefully along. Then it becomes a whirlpool. Eventually it just becomes ocean. Then it is rain again. But at the time when you were in that situation that you're alluding to, what happened there is exactly what was able to happen there. No, nothing less, nothing more. How do we know that to be true? Because that is what happened, right? Now, you can, of course, then argue with reality. And we're all very good at that. But when we're arguing with reality, who wins? Reality or us? Especially the reality of the past is pretty solid because it is not changeable. But we're not content with this. We believe, oh no, it should have been different. And then we make ourselves miserable with a thought that ultimately says, this should have been different. And that has never been able to be true ever since time began, and will never be able to be true until time is no longer. You see, the past is the past, and it is the way it was, and it is perfect the way it was. But when we look back at it, we can have one of two takes. We can say, oh no, it should have been different, and that's what you're doing, and you're stressing yourself, and you're miserable. You have this internal war with reality, which you can only lose. Or you can look at the past and say, oh, this is what happened. Isn't that interesting? Now I can learn a lot from it. Now, oh, so this is what happened, and this is what I didn't do. Wow, isn't that far out? Now I'm already somebody different, because now I would do that because I've learned from the past. You see, then the past enriches you. It teaches you. So it's your choice how you deal with your past. If you imagine that there should have been a different outcome, or you wanted a different outcome, and you attach yourself to that, you will suffer. There's no other possible outcome because the past was what it was, and it cannot be changed. But you can learn a great deal from it, but you can't learn when your mind is having that war going on. You know? So peace waits for you in the realization that it was perfect, including the perfection of now learning from it. And knowing that when there's something that you really, really want, and you can't have it, that is entirely good news. Because then something that's even better than you can imagine that thing in the past. Something even better than that has got to happen. That's a cosmic law. But if your mind is back in the past, wanting the past to be different, you're going to miss what the better thing that can happen now. So there it is. The past is an incredible source of learning for all of us, right? But when we create regrets, we don't learn appropriately because we don't look at it. We look at it with an overlay of what we want, what it should have been, we think, right? Which is complete painful fantasy, nothing real about it. It could only have been what it was. And so people look at great atrocities, for instance, in human history and say, oh, this shouldn't have happened. No, not true. It should have happened. When we say it shouldn't have happened, we're not really playing with a full deck, as they say. Yes, it should have happened. And it's up to us to prevent it from happening again. Now, today, in us. That's where it needs to start. You know, my little pet issue, not so little, is the Holocaust. That starts with the slightest little prejudice of an idea in you. And those things can be so hidden. I remember many years ago, somebody asked me, you know, what are you prejudiced against? And I couldn't find anything. I was just like so cool, you know. I could accept everyone, male, female, whatever sex they were, whatever they wanted. I mean, just I couldn't find it. I said, well, I just don't have any prejudices. I guess I couldn't find anything. And then it hit me like a Mack truck. Nazis. I had a complete prejudice against the Nazis because that's where my pain was. And it was like so big I couldn't see it. Because of course they're bad people in my mind, right? So you have to weed out even the smallest seeds of prejudice or, you know, wanting anyone to be different. Because when you want someone to be different, you can't really be there for them. You can't understand them because you're not meeting them. You're meeting your projection onto them. Oh, they should be XYZ, right? Well, what's the XYZ? That comes from you. So you're not seeing them. And therefore you can't interact with them in a way that might be helpful for that person. And of course, you don't see that the face of God is reality as it is. Everyone exactly as they are. That's the face of God right now. And it changes all the time. It's this constantly changing picture. But as soon as you want someone just a tiny little bit better than they are, you cannot see God in them. And you're blind. And to live in this love that is so deep inside of you, so rich, so there to heal everything inside of you, all the confusion, all the pain. To live in that love fully means to see it everywhere around you. Because that's the fullness of that love. You live in that love with everything. Your entire world is drenched in that love. And that does not mean ever that you do not have discrimination. This discrimination, we call it discernment now, but this discrimination, the word took on a different meaning. The discernment between what is right and wrong, what is good and what is not good, what is helpful and what is not. Of course you have to know that. But the oneness inside of you can accept everything as it is. And in that way you can contribute to your life and to humanity in a way that is the most powerful. Everything quiet there? Okay. All right. Let's close our last satsang on these shores for now. So just come into your heart and just remember this light of the moon. And find that soothing light of the moon inside your heart. And let it shine the light of God's presence into every part of your being and every part of your world. And you may want to make a commitment to you again, to drink from the source again and again. Whenever something distracts you in your world and hurts you or scares you, whenever something seems to be missing, come back to the source in you. Let it touch you. And then let it touch everyone in your world. So let's close the satsang with a Om. Take a deep breath. Thank you. Namaste, and we'll see you soon from India.